Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, you are.
I don't
You're
know.
kind of a big deal.
Here we go.
And we're
Here we go,
expanding too.
guys.
Good for you.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Opinions expressed are those of the show hosts, not WSTU or Treasure Coast Broadcasters. Any reproduction or reuse of this program without the written consent of WSTU is strictly prohibited. Welcome to Paradox. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 772-220-WSTU. And now your hosts for Paradox, Dr. Ira Pearlstein and Dr. Leanne Talton.
Hey, we're back in the studio. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Ira.
I'm glad you're doing better.
I mean, am I? I don't know.
Well, you had me so worried because of your paroxysmal coughing and, we got that coronavirus out there that hopefully won't come here. I thought about you when you kept coughing.
When I was first sick, January 1st, it wasn't coronavirus yet. But now that coronavirus is like the biggest deal, that's definitely what I have.
Right. And coronavirus is never served with a lime, correct? Like the beer. Anyway.
First pun of the day, folks.
Yes, we got a live guest in the studio today, and we're going to introduce our guests. But our last guest, in last week's show, we had that phone-in guest, and that allows us to bring in people from all over the world. So who knows where this show is going to go, and it's going to go places, I think. I've got a rant.
Let's hear it.
I want to talk about our rant. I want to talk about the inefficiency in the medical system tonight.
So, in other words, this is a 5-hour show.
No, it's not a 5-hour show. I'm going to keep it very brief. But see, one of my pet peeves in medicine, and it affects both my daily workflow as well as my patient overall satisfaction, is how long it actually takes to accomplish what would seem like a simple menial task. For instance, a simple phone call being put on hold for often 20 minutes, sent faxes from the office which are confirmed and marked received by my machine and computer, but never acknowledged by the receiver, and a general lackluster and ineffectual method of communication overall plagues how we as physicians practice medicine on a daily basis.
A truer statement was never said.
Thank you, Mrs. Lincoln. One perk about what we do as direct primary care docs is you and I stay on top of things, but in a large practice without direct doctor supervision, things definitively can get lost in that shuffle. See, I was once told by a colleague that if airlines ran their business like the medical system runs their business, there would not only be multiple delays, but crashes on a daily basis. How frightening is that? The problem often stems from lack of communication. Hospitals have kind of found a way around this, thank goodness. They create a chain of command and task things that are even double or even triple system checked and balanced. For example, prior to surgery, the entire operating team will have a timeout. They'll identify the patient. They'll identify the correct site of surgery. They'll do an instrument count, a sponge count, and identify each person in the OR and their role in that operating room. The same is true now with dispensing medications to the patient on the floor in the hospital. Hospitals have found a way around this. Unfortunately, in practice and in offices, it's not the same. If a physician makes a referral to a specialist, it may take weeks or even months to get in to see them. And it's not always because that particular physician is too busy, but rather it's a lack of communication between the two offices, or what's worse, no communication at all. I might say, you need to see the cardiologist. Patient says, okay, fine. I'll say I'll make the referral. The referral is then generated by a computer, and it's either emailed or faxed to the specialist office where it might be received, read or not read that day, and put aside as their workloads continue to pile up. Doctors in large group practices don't have time to call the specialists as they are on a time crunch to get through the day to improve patient satisfaction scores of decreased wait times. However, guys, audience, Leanne and I will call the specialist directly because we're direct primary care doctors for a more heads up approach. But this doesn't happen in large practices. And why is that? Several reasons, but primarily lack of time. The offices are too rushed and there are too many interruptions. You know, the largest mistake that doctors' offices make, it's not misdiagnosis, it's not mismanagement, it's errors of interruption. Things are coming at you all days from different angles. Pharmacies are busy too. They don't check computer entries or electronically prescribe prescriptions as often as they should. Patients have long wait times in pharmacies, and if you have to call in a prescription as a doctor, it can take 20 or 30 minutes on hold. And pharmacies are busy, particularly now.
For
And
doctors?
For doctors. And on a doctor call-in line, I've been on hold with Walgreens or CVS 20 minutes or more on a weekend day. Outside labs often allege they don't receive lab orders or they can't find them once they're sent. The problem, no one confirms that they're there. There's no so-called green light. Give us a thumbs up that everything's okay. Sometimes it's just left undone. The patient will show up for the labs. We don't have your order. And we'll call there and go, oh, yeah, we found it. We didn't put it in for this day. It's frustrating for both doctor and patient. It creates delays in testing, delays in obtaining results, and it keeps everything from being smoothly processed. The lack of communicating computer systems has never happened in medicine. There's no shared medical records, despite patients' perceptions that one actually exists. This was supposed to be a hallmark of electronic healthcare systems and a safety check when electronic healthcare records were mandated years ago. We, you and I, and most physicians in this country deliver what I would call great, even stellar medical care, but we are light years behind in achieving a cohesive, smoothly flowing system with shared data and a system of efficiency with safe checks and balances. We could likely cut costs in medicine by better communication and improved efficiency. At least we could avoid the duplicity of sending in orders multiple times or repeating labs or x-rays because there was no communication that they've already been done. And that's my rant for this week.
I love it. I'll say that I think that one of the reasons why this has happened is because when you get into a big group, there's very little personal accountability. In other words, in fast food and a lot of other retail, you are held accountable for the amount of business that you do. You're held accountable by individual patient satisfaction. But when you work for a big system and you're answering call after call after call, I think there is this anonymity that you can hide under. And consequently, if the work doesn't get done, you'll never get blamed for it. So people fail to follow through with making sure that the patient's issue, whether it be, an order, a referral, or a prescription, gets handled. And you and I don't have the same luxury. Our guest today doesn't have the same luxury because we're business owners. And business owners make sure it gets done because I'm accountable to the patient directly. But I think when you work for a big system, you can hide under that cloak.
Yes, but the danger is, even though we can get it done, it's difficult because we have to refer out to big systems.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the worst parts of my job is the fact that people sign up, they pay money thinking that they're going to get a better product from me, and they do, but we still have to participate in this broken system. So I spend a lot of time explaining the system so people kind of know what to expect. And it's just a waste of time. It feels like a waste of their time for me to continue to explain how things will go wrong. But if you don't do that, they assume that it's me who dropped the ball.
Absolutely. A less than perfect world. We're going to get on with the show. I want to introduce our guest. I have Jeffrey Tucker. He's an MPT, and I'll let him explain what that is, because this is a show on physical therapy. And we call this show, You Gotta Keep Moving, because you ever heard of the term disuse atrophy? If you don't use it, you lose it. This is the guy who, you look up disuse atrophy or anti-disuse atrophy in the dictionary, it would have his picture. He has been a physical therapist in the area for many years. I've known him at least 15 years. And he now has his own physical therapy company and sports medicine company, Premier Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine. Welcome to our show, Jeffrey Tucker, MPT.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Glad to have you. What does MPT stand for?
So about the time that I went to PT school, they were converting from a regular physical therapist to a master's program. So we actually had to go in and be trained under a master's level program, which has now been converted, as you probably know, to a doctorate program.
When did that change, that it's been converted to a doctorate program?
Oh, that's been, I'd say about 7-8 years, probably, maybe a little bit longer.
Well, I regard you as a doctor because you're the one who advises me on how to keep my patients moving and keep them better. What brought you to this area?
So interesting story. I took my first job in North Carolina. I was actually working at a level 1 trauma hospital and was doing a lot of work with Wake Forest athletes. My interest was really in sports medicine and treating athletes. And I had a recruiter that really just wouldn't leave me alone and kept begging me to come to Florida. So I basically turned into a free vacation. And I came down here for 8 days. My only commitment was to interview at 4 locations. And on my 4th interview, after I turned it down 3 times, the offer kept getting better. And I kept turning it down and the offer kept getting better. And all of a sudden, sunny Florida seemed very attractive to me. So I had no intentions of coming here. And I ended up coming here and I've been here 25 years.
And how long ago are we talking about?
That was in 1995.
Okay, so 25 years ago, and you met your wife here.
I met my wife here. I was working in an orthopedic group and she was a pharmaceutical rep. And she kept coming in and I kept following her out and one thing led to another. And now we have 2 great kids.
Well, I have that same problem. I met my wife as a pharmaceutical rep as well.
I do know that.
Yeah, so that's a good problem to have, right? So you're here, you're on the Treasure Coast, and you've been in private practice. You've been a director of a physical therapy program in a large hospital in the area. And now you have your own multi-office enterprise. Let's call it that. Let's call it an enterprise. And we love that. Premier Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine. How'd you come up with that concept?
So in 2001, I decided to take a jump. And actually, it was 3 weeks before I was getting married. So I basically was unemployed when I was opening Premier. I was told by a colleague of mine years ago, always put your name in the company. I just didn't feel right about doing that. So I tried to come up with something that wasn't already down here. Premier kind of hit my mind and I took off running with it.
And it is really stellar. It is Premier. And the sports medicine, you've always had the sports medicine component?
So yeah, my undergraduate was in sports medicine. And so I became licensed and certified in the state of North Carolina as an athletic trainer. And at the time, I really didn't know a lot about physical therapy, to be quite honest. And, I'm dating myself, but this was back in, 1988. And I was all set to do an internship, if you will, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I was going to graduate, sit for my boards and then go work with Steelers. And the director of the college I was going to actually is the one who convinced me to try to go to PT school. And that's kind of how that came about. But my experience as an athletic trainer working with Division II and Division III athletes of every sport you can think of was what really kept me interested when I came down to Florida.
Now, I've always referred patients to physical therapists. Chronic pain, low back pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, older people who just aren't moving, gait and balance disorders. We'll get into some of this later. But can a patient refer themselves into physical therapy without a doctor's order?
Yes. So in the state of Florida, we have what's called, we call it modified direct access. But basically for 30 days, any patient can walk into our facility and be evaluated and treated. But at 30 days, they have to be referred out. There are certain restrictions. For example, if you have an insurance plan, it requires authorization, things like that from your primary care. We can't see that patient. But most of your standard insurances, we can. And actually, we've seen a huge increase in that just in the last 2 years.
What about cash pay? Cash pay, they can just keep going as long as they want without a referral?
They can, but obviously, just like any patient we would treat, if we're making progress with that patient, then, we encourage them to continue. But if we're not gaining any progress or we feel like they need to be referred out, we want to get them to where they can go to get better.
Okay, well, that's great. So overall, and I know you've got that sports medicine background, but you employ a lot of therapists. So you must do the whole gamut of physical therapy. What type of patients are you treating in your facilities?
All of them. I mean, quite honestly, we treat our practice is predominantly orthopedic musculoskeletal. So you can pretty much name it: any wrist, hand, elbow, shoulder, back, spine, neck, disc, knee, hip. We treat all that. We do get a fair share of patients with some vestibular issues, balance issues, general weakness. We see a lot of those patients that may be hospitalized for an extended period of time. And occasional we'll have a neurological patient, some CVAs, MS. We've even had a few ALS patients.
Okay, so we're talking about patients with the gamut of severe neurological diseases. He mentioned ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a severe neurodegenerative breakdown leading to respiratory difficulties, multiple sclerosis. You mentioned the MS, and there have been a lot of strides in MS patients. They're living a lot longer because of some of the new medications out there. And the post-stroke patient, I would think that would be very rewarding to have someone who has had a stroke and didn't have resolution in the hospital with a clot buster because they presented late, and you can help them overcome some of that.
That's correct. The biggest issue we run into, in all honesty, is, and this goes for any patient, not just the ones you're mentioning, is the timeliness that they come to therapy. All the studies are out there. And again, you can talk about the post-stroke patient, which is a great example, but it goes as far as low back pain. It doesn't matter who the patient is. And that's the biggest challenge, or I guess maybe from our aspect, the frustration we have is, let's just take a simple case. Somebody with injures a rotator cuff. Maybe they were a weekend warrior playing softball.
So for our listening audience, that would be an injury of the shoulder.
Of the shoulder.
And there are 4 tendons that make up the rotator cuff and kind of keep your shoulder in place.
Correct.
Okay, just kind of want to give you guys out there and the audience kind of a visual on this.
So basically these 4 muscles are what we call dynamic stabilizers, which means as you're moving your arm through space, they're controlling the position of your shoulder as far as accelerating and decelerating the shoulder.
So you're talking about the radiator cap is one, the rotational calf. Everybody messes up rotator cuff.
The most common is rotary cup.
Rotary cup,
Yeah,
rotary cup.
A
injury.
rotary cup. Yeah, we hear rotary cup a lot. We're going to turn up the gain on Dr. Leanne's microphone. You're good? Good.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Now I can hear you better.
There we go.
I just want to make sure the audience was able to hear you. And what I like about your clinics or your therapy offices is my patients don't like to travel a lot. So I know you're located all over the area. You have a place in St. Lucie West. You have a office in Jensen Beach. You have one in Port St. Lucie and one in Stewart, correct?
So we currently have 6.
6.
And you hit the nail on the head. Our goal when I opened the practice was, and I learned this when we opened in St. Lucie West as a perfect example. People don't want to travel. And so over the past several years, we have continued to open. We're now in Palm City, South Stewart, what I call Eastern Port St. Lucie by the hospital, St. Lucie West, Fort Pierce, and Jensen Beach. And right now we have 2 other facilities that are under construction.
And this makes a lot of sense for somebody that's in physical therapy, because the patients aren't going, like to our office once every quarter. With physical therapy, your goal is to see people multiple times per week, correct?
Correct.
And so if they're having to travel a long way or, go after work or through traffic, that's a barrier to them wanting to come as frequently as they should. Do you encounter that a lot where people think it's too many times per week?
Sometimes. Couple things. I think the insurance limitations are greater than the patients. A lot of the copays have been increased in recent years. So we've kind of gotten creative with how we treat those patients so that, they still can get the help that they need. And I think that's probably a bigger barrier, but yeah, having the locations in various areas has been very helpful.
That's great. Yeah, a lot of my patients, they'll come home from the hospital. They'll be deconditioned, and they want home physical therapy. And I try to encourage them, one, to go to a physical therapy facility if they can, because you can do more at there than just, I can teach you how to use a walker at your house. I can teach you how to use a cane at your house, but you have the equipment, you have the space. What's different about what you do when someone comes with physical deconditioning in one of your offices than what can be done in someone's home?
So for the home health, there's some great therapists out there, and they get very creative with how they treat people at home. In our facility, and again, you said a lot of this, but we have a variety of equipment. Our main facility in Port St. Lucie is just over 5,000 square feet. So, we can take them if they come from home health. We can take them from where they left off, and we have more advanced equipment, larger space, and we can do more things with the patient. A good example is balance patients. In order to work on balance, you have to put them in positions that's going to challenge, the vestibular system, eyesight, everything that encompasses your balance. And in the home, there are some great things you can do, but we have, in some of our clinics, balance system machines that are much more challenging, not something you can take to somebody's house. And then just the various equipment that we have.
Plus, I will say that I feel like the majority of my referrals to physical therapy are for balance and gait training. So people that, I think all of us know now with our Fitbits that, regular Americans are walking hardly at all. We get the closest place to the grocery store entrance. We don't like to walk. We don't have buses here. Everything is by car. So the baseline level of deconditioning for most people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s is probably pretty high. And so then you add a period of
with the exception of thumbs.
Right. Our thumbs
Our
are in
thumbs
great
are incredible shape.
Yes. So, I think that most people could benefit from balance and gait training once they're of any elderly age. And then you add a period of illness or anything else on top of it, and they are just so in need of your services. So I love to send people for balance and gait training.
Well, I think I was looking at Council on Aging had some statistics out, and it showed every 11 seconds a patient is being seen for a fall.
Yeah.
And that's a high percentage.
Yeah. And I talk to people about that because it's like, yes, it's an inconvenience to have to go into the physical therapist multiple times per week to work on this, partly getting you out of your house to walk into the physical therapy office is more activity than they're used to doing. But if you were to break a hip, if you were to break your arm, that's significant downtime for most people that are over the age of 75.
And it's one of the most common causes of death. They'll
death?
recover from the actual hip surgery. The hip surgery is easy. It's the aftermath. It's the infection. It's the downtime. It's the development of pneumonia. Hey, by the way, if you just joined us, we're right here at WSTU 1450. Or if you joined us the next day, we're actually on a podcast. We're talking to Dr. and Master of Physical Therapy, Jeffrey Tucker from Premier Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine. You got to keep moving is our show. We're going to take a 1-minute commercial break, and we'll be back to talk about specific things that Mr. Tucker can do to help you get better.
Welcome back to Paradox. I'm Dr. Leanne Talton here with Dr. Ira Pearlstein, and you are tuning in for our show, You Gotta Keep Moving, with our special guest, Jeffrey Tucker, who is owner of Premier Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine. We're so excited to have you here. The physical therapist that does a great job is the primary care doctor's best friend. Right?
You are.
People are like, not another referral to physical therapy. You're always sending me, but we really need you.
And you know what I like about having him here and having his offices all over the place? It's one less pill I have to put someone on, because everything out there, folks, isn't fixed by a pill. Sometimes you got to keep moving.
And isn't that great? I love that, because it's sort of like people that say they don't want vaccines, but then they want antibiotics. The same thing. It's like, doc, I don't want another pill. Oh, great. So then we're going to commit you to 12 weeks of physical therapy. And they're like, no, they got to
don't
put their
do that.
money
I
where
have
their
to
mouth
actually
is.
leave the
Right.
sofa.
So before we took our break, we were talking about deconditioned elderly. So, and elderly is a relative term, right? Because you don't, I mean, to me, 70 years old is not elderly, but yet in a way, you can be fairly deconditioned by that age. And by deconditioned, we mean that your body just doesn't work the way that it used
It's the
to.
rusty bicycle in the garage. You don't use it, you lose it.
Exactly. So I think it's sometimes difficult for patients that don't have any particular injury. They don't have pain necessarily, but in general, they feel like their legs aren't cooperating, or they feel a little unsteady, or, they're just having some balance issues. They're not sure if they need a cane. They're just a little bit worried about their mobility. I will send them for balance and gait training. And I think that's a concept that might be unfamiliar for some of our patients. Why, if I don't have anything specifically wrong, what is a physical therapist going to do? So our question for you today is, what do you do?
So every patient that comes in, obviously we take them through about a 45-minute evaluation, and we test everything from strength to mobility, and we test what's called functional strength. So for example, we might all take for granted sitting in a lazy boy and getting out of the chair to get something to drink. For some people, they may fall back or not be able to get out of that chair. And that's something we see a lot with some of our, elderly patients. I had a gentleman recently who came in, and his goal was to walk to the end of a 250-foot dock, but he couldn't walk to the end of his driveway to get the mail without having to sit down. And he had, there's other causes to this, obviously. And for the listeners, he had his, circulation checked in his legs and different things that could lead to that. And it all came back negative. So he was referred to us, and we did an exam on him. We found he was very deconditioned and weak. And otherwise, medical history was unremarkable. It was normal. So we put him on a series of exercises that really focused on function. Okay, not something you think about exercise when you go to the gym. We had him doing some what we call sit to stand. So you start at a higher level and you practice getting out of a chair, first with your hands, then without your hands. That's just one example. And we set up a whole series of exercises. And after 4 weeks, he walked that 250-foot dock, and that was his goal. So, we get a lot of patients like this. A lot of the times they just came out of the hospital and they just can't seem to move very well. So we will set them up on a program for strengthening. If they need some balance, if we did a balance test on them and it looks like they were losing their balance quite a bit, we would go ahead and put them on a program for that as well.
Yeah, I always ask patients, like, when was the last time you got up from the ground? And people can really go years if they haven't fallen without ever having to get up from the ground. And it's interesting how many people can't do it, and they don't figure it out until something happens, and then they're stuck.
I don't think most of my friends can sit down with their legs crossed on the floor.
Sure.
And then they'll have problems getting up.
Sure.
And there are multiple reasons. People are lazy. They don't work out. And I'm not saying you guys
showers. Okay. We don't take tubs anymore. You don't get out of the tub.
I can't get out of the tub.
Right. Our beds are so high.
Exactly.
We're not taking picnics anymore.
And we don't walk, much less run or exercise or move a lot. And that's why yoga and Tai Chi and all that is so good. And out there, I'm not trying to put Jeff Tucker out of business. I'm trying to make his job easier.
We recommend it.
Start
Put us out of
moving. Make
I
his
dare
job
you.
easy. Make our job easy.
So I would imagine that another big referral that you would get is low back pain, because we're seeing so much low back pain in the office. A lot of times the insurance puts barriers to allowing people MRI reports. until they have done a course of physical therapy. And this is very interesting because a lot of that goes against everybody's core nature. They do not want to continue not knowing what is the problem.
I
They
love it.
want a picture, but
But
insurance says no.
and here's the
sometimes
thing,
until you
Leanne
do
and
PT.
Jeff, about low back pain, which I find amazing. It's the second most common reason people see us in the office. The first, by the way, is fatigue. It's the most common reason in the United States for missed work days, and it accounts for hundreds of $1 million loss of work per year. And low back pain is found in patients who have a high degree of work dissatisfaction. And if you do nothing at all for low back pain, the majority of low back pain will resolve on its own in 2 weeks. Having said that, when it lasts longer than 2 weeks, I use this guy.
So what do you do for low back pain?
So a couple of things I'd like to touch on. I love not having an MRI.
Aha.
And if a patient walks in our door with an MRI and they say, do you want to see this? I don't want to see it until I'm done examining the patient.
Okay.
And my explanation to the patient is diagnostics are awesome and we love to have them, but every condition has signs and symptoms with it. And if you do a proper musculoskeletal exam, you should be able to tell the patient what's wrong with them, and that should be on the MRI.
And, another reason is because, right, they've done studies where they've, had young people who have, been in the hospital for other reasons, done MRIs, found herniated discs, things that people have never, ever complained about. And that happens even at a young age. So in other words, just because there's something bad on the MRI doesn't necessarily mean that you have the pain that correlates with that.
Correct.
So people come into you, and whether you see an MRI or not, you do an evaluation. And what is the typical program for someone with low back pain?
So first of all, it depends on what's causing the low back pain. So we could start off with something called spinal stenosis, which is narrowing of the foramen where the nerves come out of the spine. It causes pain sometimes down the leg. Those patients tend to have very tight musculature in their hips as well as their back, which can lead to further compression. So we put them on a flexibility program. A lot of therapists will use something called Williams flexion exercises. It's a lot of flexibility initially to try to create a little bit more space, a little less compression on the spine. They may even, encompass some traction, which is a machine we put them in that actually elongates the spine and creates a stretch. You take that patient, you move on to something like an acute herniated disc. It's the total opposite. We may put them in traction, but we're putting them in what we call extension, which is more of a back bend type position to try to reduce that herniation. People ask me all the time, well, can you get rid of the disc bulge completely? And they've had providers, other people they've worked with said, yeah, we can get rid of this. You really don't get rid of the herniation, but you reduce it so that bulge isn't irritating the nerve root and their pain is gone. So depending upon what they need or what their specific condition and dictates what we do. But all these patients will have some form of flexibility because they all tend to have tightness in certain areas, which can lead to back pain. Good examples, hamstrings and hip flexors are usually always tight in people with back problems.
So having said what you said, Leanne, that the radiographic evaluation, the x-ray or the MRI might show horrible findings and the patient may be relatively asymptomatic, or it might not show much and the patient could be very symptomatic. At what point, Jeff, do you recommend a patient have an MRI after you've evaluated them?
So the first and foremost would be what we call red flags. Red flags would be anything we're doing in the exam. I'll give you an example. We had a gentleman come to me with, it's not low back, but it was a shoulder pain. And we examined his shoulder. He had full range of motion. He had full strength. We did a series of special tests. All the tests were negative. So okay, maybe it's coming from the neck. We did a full neck exam. Everything was negative. We referred him out, and it was a good thing we did.
Referred pain from the abdomen? From lung cancer?
It was metastatic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And-
bad.
Yeah. But so to answer your question, we look for red flags first. And if there's no red flags on our exam, then as long as the patient is making progress with therapy, the general rule of thumb is 4 weeks for our practice. If they're making progress with physical therapy, then we're not in a hurry to refer out. If we hit that 3 week mark, 3.5 week mark, pain's not improving, patient's obviously not going to be too satisfied or the pain is getting worse, then we refer them out.
And I'll tell you that, I mean, I said it before that a good physical therapist can be a primary care doctor's best friend. I have had physical therapists before call me and say something new has come about, or, in the process of our evaluation, which you already said, your initial evaluation is 40 minutes. I mean, so you're spending a huge chunk of time with these people that most of us in regular practice, at least, have never spent with our patients face to face, actually moving their body, touching their body, that a lot of times I'll get a call that says, nope, we're barking up the wrong tree. In fact, I think you need imaging of this. And they're right every time. They've been right every time. So we really appreciate your expertise.
Yeah, we do the same. We have contacts for almost all of our referrals. And if there's anything that doesn't look good, we usually reach out to them right away.
So let's move around the body a little bit here. Let's talk about knees. I see an awful lot of people with knee injuries, particularly after they've come back from skiing or hiking.
ACL.
And ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament, that X-shaped ligament that is more common tear in women than it is in men. You want to talk about that for a little bit?
I love ACLs. It is more common in women, and you're absolutely right. Usually a skiing injury or, for the listeners, so your lower leg, your shin bone, any force that causes that lower bone to move forward in relation to the knee will put the ACL on a very strong stretch. And sometimes our hamstrings will fire and prevent further injury, but sometimes it doesn't, and an ACL can just tear. And so when that happens, you lose stability of that knee, which then can lead to wearing of the cartilage of the knee, which can lead to osteoarthritis and those sorts of things. So we do see a fair amount of that.
Now, the myth out there is, I tore my ACL. I need to be referred to an orthopedist. It needs to be surgically fixed. But that's not always the case, is it?
No, but I think it depends. We had an athlete recently who plays football at a local high school, and his father came in and said, we're going to brace him and he's going to play his senior year. And we strongly advised him against it. I think in a situation where you are really active, you play sports, whether it be recreational or at school level, or you're just somebody who likes to run every single weekend, I think it's a good idea, in my opinion, to get it fixed, because again, that instability can lead to further problems. Now, this will vary a little bit from surgeon to surgeon and therapist to therapist, but I think when you get into your, 40s, 45-ish, if you're somebody who's fairly active, but you're not doing a lot of running or cutting or things like that, then I think in some cases you can forego that.
Let's talk about something I see in teenagers a lot, or in people that run a lot, chondromalacia.
Okay.
Explain to us what that is.
So not to be confused with the cartilage inside the knee that everybody talks about knee replacements for. There's a thin layer of cartilage underneath the kneecap. And so when you bend and straighten your knee, your kneecap actually fits in a groove and it slides up and down. And it actually, gives your quad some advantage for strength. And sometimes if the outside of our leg gets tight, or if the inside of our thigh muscles get weak, the tracking of how that kneecap glides can change. And so that cartilage underneath there can start to become irritated. I tell patients it kind of looks like crab meat. If you take a piece of crab meat, it flakes. And when that happens, that underside of the kneecap becomes very painful, very achy. People tend to have a hard time, they're sitting in a chair for a few hours and they go to get up and it's real achy. That's another condition we see. And again, if it's not severe, usually we find there's weakness on the inside of the quads and tightness on the outside. And once you address that, that usually resolves it.
And do you recommend leg strengthening exercises for that, strengthening the quads?
Absolutely.
I was once told that someone with chondromalacia should have keep their knee non-flexed while they're sitting in a chair, and put maybe 1 or 2 pounds of weight on their ankles and practice just lifting with their knee in a straight position just to tighten the quads. Does that still hold true?
You can do that. There are certain exercises that you want to avoid. We get more into that with our patients. For example, everybody knows the machine where you sit down and you have the bar that goes across just above your ankles and you straighten your legs, leg extension, they call it. Somebody who has chondromalacia, that can actually be quite painful because you create a lot of compression on the kneecap as the quads contract. But along the lines of what you were talking about, we tend to like the knees at about 30 degrees of bend and then working on straightening the last 30 degrees because that strengthens the inside muscle. And sometimes turning the hip outward and raising the whole leg straight is another exercise we do sometimes. So yeah, you have to be very careful, not just strengthening, going somewhere where somebody just tells you to strengthen a whole leg. It's not always going to give you good results.
Now, when you're working with these patients with, let's say, chondromalacia, and you're putting them through this series of exercises, do you use any other modalities, ice, heat, ultrasound?
We do. Now, specific to chondromalacia, we may tape them. There's different tape. Kinesiotherapy tape's the popular thing you see now. It's the bright colored tape that's all over people's bodies. It got real popular a couple Olympics ago when the girls USA volleyball team. I'm drawing a blank on her name, but they did so well, and she had rotator cuff issues. But there's taping. Ultrasound is a deep heating modality that some therapists like to use more to stimulate more blood flow and help a little bit with pain. We use electrical stimulation. People are familiar with that, but there's different settings on that. And some settings you can actually use to try to make the quads contract harder. So therefore the theory is you're generating more strengthening and you can target specific muscle groups. And then the latest thing that we have, which is relatively new to our practice, is we have a class 4 60 watt laser. And when we purchased it, it was the only 60 watt laser in a Treasure Coast. And it's done really well for pain and healing with our practice.
What does that mean?
So class 4 is it's a hot laser. And the concept behind it is you're generating this very intense light, which has a byproduct of heat to it. And it's supposed to facilitate activity in what's called the mitochondria, which are actually in the body, very active in
The
tissue
powerhouse
healing.
of the cell.
Right.
Yeah.
Very active in tissue healing. And so, I am the biggest skeptic when it comes to some of these things. And true story, the rep wanted us to buy it. I was like, I don't think so. And he let us use it for a day. And this is not an exaggeration. This is 100% fact. We had 24 patients sign up, and we treated all 24 patients that day, and 23 of them had an immediate positive result.
Impressive.
It was very impressive. I was shocked because I did not expect that result.
So what I'm hearing is essentially that you're doing, you're investing a lot of time doing very hands-on, elaborate evaluations. You're working on multiple supporting muscle groups. You may or may not be using other modalities. It sounds like a very intense treatment program. Then you're prescribing this therapy multiple times per week for several weeks. I would imagine that you have a compliance problem. In other words, I think that, obviously, if you have a great therapist that you're very motivated to please and you trust, by the end of therapy, almost everybody gets better. But how many patients do you have that are repeat customers, or do you feel like you should have more patients who are repeat customers?
Well, a couple of things. We have a lot of repeat customers, but for different body parts. So I attribute that to they're happy with our practice. But as far as a compliance issue, honestly, if I could put a star in every patient that I knew in my mind was 100% committed, we have no compliance issues with them. The ones that, some patients are skeptical with therapy, the public still, there's some consensus out there. They still don't totally know what therapists do. Some people think it's just massage and that's not, obviously not it. So I think when patients come in a little skeptical, they might be a little less, buying into it,
Mhm.
and therefore a little less compliant. Again, I think with the insurance rates, the copay is going up. I think they're a little less compliant as well because it's financial, which again, we have great plans for the patients if they're willing to do that. But, I would say the ones that want to get better are there all the time.
So let's take an issue like low back pain, right? So in general, people that have low back pain it doesn't usually go away. I mean, for the most part, this is an issue that will flare up at times and then get better, ideally for a long time, and then it might come back again. Do you think that patients should plan to return to physical therapy if they had a good experience before, but their back pain returns several years later, that they should do another round of physical therapy? Because so far, I have patients coming in with that floppy sheet of paper with the diagrams of the people and the exercises that they're supposed to do. And I'm thinking, there's no way that you're going to do those again. I mean, I almost wish that everyone would plan to return to physical therapy every few years when their problem fails, because they can't really do the exercises on their own.
And
even
can
if
they
learn
do
them.
that? And if they do that, is it covered? What's the interim for the same medical diagnosis to have repeat physical therapy to have that covered by insurance?
So the first question is, I tell all my patients, if I just treated a patient for low back pain and they're better, they're ready to leave, I try to consolidate their exercises to what I think is the most important, so that I think they're going to be more compliant versus if I give them 15 exercises to do. Here's the 5 most important. And I tell all my patients, if you don't do these, you will be back. And that's kind of how I leave that conversation. Now, should they do them again? The only challenge with that is if it's the same back problem, you could have a totally different back problem. And like we talked about earlier, those exercises may not be the best for a separate back problem. As far as access with insurance, it just depends. For example, Medicare has a dollar amount that they allow every year. And as long as you're under that dollar amount, they can come back with another referral, or like we talked about before, for 30 days without a referral. The only insurances they really have to start over with is if it's something that requires authorization. But most plans, yes, you can come back as long as there's not any financial restrictions or otherwise on the insurance plan itself.
And is that something that, a patient could take the initiative to call your office and kind of scope that out before, making a separate appointment with their physician to say, here I am again with the same issue? I mean, can they take the initiative to do that with you and you'll help them navigate their insurance?
We call for every patient. We verify all their benefits so they know exactly what the copay is, how many visits they have, and so on and so forth. And what's really neat is with Medicare, especially because they have a dollar amount. I don't always know, and the patient doesn't always tell you if they just came down from Maine and they had 4 weeks of therapy. So if we go over that dollar amount, it's not covered. And what's neat is our documentation system we use. The second I sign off on a note on a patient I treated, it automatically tells me the exact dollar amount for that patient for that year that's been used and what's remaining, so that I know I'm not pushing that patient over. And the other thing that's important about that, if it's April and they've had a lot of therapy and they're looking at a total knee down the road, I don't want to use a lot of it up because I want them to be able to come back when they have that total knee done.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to throw it out there. Ready?
I'm ready.
And we've talked about this on every show that we've done, from diet shows to diabetic shows to our nutrition show. How often do you fat shame your patients? Because if you have someone that's 350, hey, you're laughing, and it's a radio guy, so you don't see them laughing. But if you have someone who's 350 pounds and you're rehabilitating their knee, it seems to me if they weighed 250 pounds, over 350 pounds, they would get a lot more use out of that knee. How do you address the issue in your clinics of the morbidly obese patient?
Honest answer.
Yeah, you send them back to me, right? That's the honest answer.
So usually if the patient comes in and they've already been told this, they tell me that before I even ask any questions. They come in frustrated, to be honest. And so I initially downplay it. I initially say, well, you know what? Let's take care of your knee and let's see how it goes. And then once I win that patient over, then we start having a conversation about it. Because and there's 2 different patients. If I get that patient that comes in who's already a little bit, let's just say defeated, then I don't want to push that envelope. I want to buy this patient. I want to get this patient to want to be there.
My
Now-
God, I love your approach, and it's
It
almost
works.
like you're practicing psychology.
Well,
No, you're really good at this.
So the patient that is defeated, that's your plan.
my plan is, you know what? And this is what I've said, honestly, to patients. Well, did you weigh this 5 years ago? Yes, I did. Well, you didn't have pain then, right? No. I know it probably led it, but at least at that moment, I bought that patient over. They now see I'm, maybe look at me as a friend, however you want to call it. Then as I treat them, I move them into, okay, let's talk about nutrition. What are you doing throughout the day? What are you doing the exercise? What are you doing? What are you eating? If it's a patient who's not come in that way and they just come in and I see this, we do broach the subject, because matter of fact, with Medicare now, we have to have BMI in our notes, and we are actually required to give them names of people if they are above that normal range.
So the body mass index
Yeah.
over 25 is overweight, over 30 is obese, 40 is morbidly obese. Where do you draw the line?
As far as talking with them,
No, not as far as talking with them, as far as having to report that. You said,
Oh, we have to report every patient. If they're obese, we have to at least make acknowledgement that we've educated the patient on where to go to get
got
help.
it. You know, I would love to continue. We're out of time.
Okay.
We didn't even get to the shoulder. We didn't get to the neck. Would you come back and do another show with us in the spring?
If you'll have me, sure.
You've been
I'd love
you've been
to.
a great guest, Jeffrey Tucker. Listen, folks, Jeff, on our way out, tell people if they want to call your Premier Physical Therapy and Sports Medicine, give a shout out of the number.
Area code 772-335-7966 is our main number.
Thank you, Jeff Tucker, for
Thank you.
joining us on this very busy day in your practice.
Appreciate it.
It's been great.